Blessings, I'm Reverend Patrick Mahoney. And as we know from the teachings of Scripture, Christians are to be the most law-abiding citizens in a nation. However, are there times where Christians may break civil law? And I believe the Bible teaches that there are three. The first, we may break civil law in order to save a life. Two, we may violate the law when government commands us to do evil. And three, we may violate civil law when we are forbidden to do good. Let's look at examples in Scripture and history to support this position. In Exodus 1:21, Pharaoh ordered all Hebrew women to kill their children if they had a male. Exodus 2 records the mother of Moses violating that civil law. In other words, she disobeyed the law to save the life of Moses and hid him for several months. So, Scripture gives us permission to violate and break the law in order to save a life. And we see that, of course, most notably in Nazi Germany when Christians would hide Jews from Nazi oppression and tyranny. They broke the law. They weren't allowed to do that. And then more recently, tens of thousands of members of Operation Rescue broke the law, trespass law, to peacefully intervene to save a life at abortion centers, to save children from abortion violence. Number two, when government commands us to do evil, we may violate civil law. Daniel chapter 3. All citizens were ordered to bow down before the statue of Nebuchadnezzar and worship him. Government commanded us to do evil. The three Hebrew children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refused to submit to that law, and they would not bow down. Of course, they were thrust into a fiery furnace, but nevertheless, they were allowed to break civil law when they were commanded to do evil. In history, we see that with the Fugitive Slave Act, where citizens were ordered to return enslaved black laborers to their masters. And so many Christians, especially those involved with the Underground Railroad, refused to do so. They broke civil law because it commanded them to do evil. And then finally, when the government forbids us to do good, we see this in Daniel chapter 6, where for a 30-day period, people could only pray to King Darius, as Daniel's tradition was and his routine was. He prayed to the one true and living God in violation of civil law. In other words, government forbid him to do good, and he refused to obey that law. In Acts 5, 28 and 29, we perhaps see it even more clearly. When the apostles were forbidden to preach the gospel, and in Acts 5:29, their reply was, "We must obey God rather than man." In other words, they broke civil law because government forbid them to do good. We see that in history with civil rights workers who refused to go to the back of the bus, who refused to do good by going to lunch counters and other situations. We see it in Christians who smuggle Bibles into China and other closed nations, or Christians who preach the gospel in nations where they are forbidden to do so. We may break civil law when it forbids us to do good. So, in summation, Christians are to be completely law-abiding and committed to civil authority, except on 3 occasions. In order to save a life, they may break the law. when the government commands them to do evil and when government forbids them to do good. Brothers and sisters, we will continue to talk on this topic, but as we see changes in America, we will be facing issues like this on a more regular basis. Blessings, and on with the revolution.